This is a presentation that I did for the Canadian Association of Biological Anthropology in Winnipeg in October 2023. While it was streamed for online participants, I don't think it was recorded. So if you are a member and you couldn't attend the session, or you aren't a member and would like to see the session, I've recorded it here for you today. And so this presentation is on how my research in scattered remains turned into a podcast, and it all started with the why. So why is why important? Well, first and foremostly is that if you, as a student, were funded through your supervisor's grant funding, or if you had funding of your own, it's likely that funding came through the tri-agencies, NSERC, SSHRC, or CIHR. Tri-agency funding is from taxpayers, and taxpayers like to know the return on their investment. They want to know why you're doing the research and how it is important for them. The why in a personal context can also be important. Why are you doing this research? Why is it important to you? Why are you passionate about it? Does it fuel you? Why does it get you out of bed in the morning, looking through dirt and dusty books and staying in the lab all day? Or maybe there's a combination of the personal why and the return on investment why. Maybe you want to do the research because it could make a change in the world. All of these whys are very important. Why can be the fuel and motivating force behind looking for answers and changing the world for the better. When I started my grad studies at the University of Alberta in 2002, which was a very long time ago, I was pretty into taphonomy. I began a project looking for patterns in the dispersal of remains due to scavenger activity. And about the same time, the Sandra Levy case came into media attention. Sandra Levy was an intern in Washington, D.C., and on May 1st, 2001, she was listed as missing. She was due to return to California to visit her family, and she never showed up. Her family got the police involved. Then, a couple of months after she was noted as missing, the police started doing searches of Sandra's neighborhood, including wooded areas. And one of those wooded areas was Rock Creek Park. The initial search of Rock Creek Park had a large number of police recruits and personnel. They searched for nearly 3 weeks, but they didn't really find anything. And then about a year later, a man was walking his dog through Rock Creek Park, and he found a skull. That skull was later positively identified as Sandra Levy's. Then a second search by law enforcement ensued of Rock Creek Park. They did find some things, but not a whole lot. Meanwhile, the Levy family had hired a couple of private investigators, and those private investigators went out to Rock Creek Park after the second search was done. They found skeletal remains, and so a third search was led by law enforcement of Rock Creek Park. When I looked at this case and compared it to what I was studying at the time, very serendipitously, I saw some issues. Law enforcement was pouring massive amounts of time and money into searching. They searched 3 times with very poor results. And it took a man walking his dog and private investigators before they found any really substantial forensic evidence. And that reflected poorly on the law enforcement agency investigating the case. I saw all of these problems with this case when I was doing my research on the dispersal of remains. My research was directly applicable to this case. Here I had a solution on how to help people to work smarter on cases like this rather than harder. And I know how you can decrease the amount of resources, labor, and money by knowing more about the patterns in the dispersal of remains due to scavenger activity. So I thought, I'm going to go out and I'm going to mobilize the solution and help people who search for remains. I'm going to mobilize the answer. So I finished my graduate work. I published my article. I provided training for volunteers and law enforcement, tried to join a search and rescue group, and I offered them training. I even went so far as applying to do a PhD so I could get more information on the solution. But none of that was working. And it was probably because I was trying to provide an answer when nobody knew the question. Nobody knew there was a question. Nobody saw a reason to change. Nobody saw that there was a problem. And so here I was with an answer when nobody was asking the question. And this kind of came to my attention in 2020 when everything else in the world was changing. I was invited by the RCMP to sit on a strategic advisory group on a cold case. And when I was in this meeting, one of the investigators, who knew my background in archaeology, asked, "Well, how far down do we dig?" And I said, "Well, why would you dig? This was a surface deposition." He didn't know that in Alberta, in the boreal forest, items can sit on the surface of the soil for years and years. And he was prepared to go out with a backhoe excavator looking for the remains of this individual. That showed me that people don't know what they don't know. Sometimes they don't know enough to ask the question. So you know those situations where you don't even know enough to ask a question? That's what this was. And it felt like I was coming up against this in disseminating the knowledge about dispersed remains. People don't know what they don't know. And they don't know enough to ask a question. They don't know to ask a question. I thought, I'm going to find a way to make information available to people so that they can ask questions, so that they know enough to ask a question. And I thought podcasts are great because they can disseminate all of this rich, valuable information in an accessible format. And then serendipity kind of hit again. I was invited by Dr. Shari Forbes to take part in her Canadian scavenging study. For anybody who doesn't know who Shari is, she has the only human decomposition facility in Canada. She works with law enforcement dog handlers and their cadaver or human remains detection dogs so that they can train their dogs on the scent of human decomposition. In training these dog handlers and working with them, these dog handlers would ask Shari, "Okay, so the dogs have a scent of human decomposition, but we need to know when to stop searching and in what direction to start the dog searching. We don't know where to search and how far to search." And frankly, neither did Shari, so she decided to find out. Shari started the scavenging study in Ontario, and then she wanted to expand it across the country. So when she got to Alberta, she started searching around for physical anthropologists or biological anthropologists, and she found me. Until Alberta, Shari had only been looking at scavenger guilds, the animals scavenging the carcass placed in these experimental contexts. When Shari started to set up in Alberta, I asked her to include looking for patterns in the dispersal of the remains. So now we have a two-pronged approach in Alberta, the scavenger guilds and the dispersal patterns, two answers to one problem. A problem that law enforcement had asked Shari, and a problem that they are helping us to answer. The key here was dog handlers had identified the problem, and this is why they were open to hearing of solutions. So then I got to thinking, instead of mobilizing the knowledge or the answer or the solution, why not mobilize the problem? Because people need to ask why. And not only that, but like I showed you with the Canadian scavenging study, there can be one question, but you can have multiple answers. One problem can have multiple solutions. And when you identify the problem, when you ask the question, and when people ask why, there is a rallying behind the problem. The question motivates. There is a drive to find the solution. There is energy and emotion. People get invested to find the solution, kind of like you are in your research. Without the question, there would be no drive to find a solution or to make a change. So if you mobilize the question, you're actually leveraging a lot of that motivational energy. When I asked before why you are doing your research, it's probably more of just a return on investment for taxpayers' dollars. It's probably because you want to find an answer. You have a problem that nags at you. There is a gap in the literature that drives you batty in bed at night, or you have a personal calling. If there's nothing to figure out, no gaps to fill, no changes to make, then there's likely a lot less motivation or action or change. So it circles back around to the why. And that is why the why is important. It isn't so much about focusing on the answer, because if you have an answer, you have no reason to change. Instead, focus on the problem and harness that need to change. So my podcast, Scattered, One Person's Search for the Story Behind Human Remains, is now just over 3 years old. It started to bring attention to and mobilize on knowledge about dispersed remains. However, it is evolving because, thanks to working on the Canadian scavenging study, I know how important it is for the audience to know about the problem. So it's no longer just about the solution, it's about the problem. So for the podcast, I've defined the problem as inaccessible, valuable information about human remains and the dead. Usually this information is hidden behind publisher paywalls or locked in people's heads. There is also a societal taboo against talking openly and freely about death. So these are the 3 driving reasons why I continue the podcast. But is anybody listening? Well, yeah, people are listening, but I don't know who those people are. Am I making a change with my targeted audiences of law enforcement, searchers, and families? I recently released a survey for audience members to fill out, but no responses yet. And then the final question I'm asking is, does my audience want the solution, knowledge, or answers that I offer on the podcast? Yes. I mean, I kind of have to say yes because the podcast is doing well and growing. But I don't know if people are using the information the podcast provides. I talk to experienced professionals and experts. I encourage people to talk about themselves and tell the story of their experience or their research so that an audience can get high quality, valuable information from the horse's mouth, all in an accessible format. So if you have any ideas about finding out who may be listening or what else I could do, please let me know. In the meantime, I hope you'll have a listen.